Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Julie Elliott.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have been asked to reply. I've been asked to reply. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, I have been asked to reply on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who has been visiting China. I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, the whole House will wish to join me in offering our condolences to the family and friends of those who have been tragically killed following the helicopter crash in Glasgow on Friday evening. Our thoughts must also, of course, be with those who are injured at this difficult time. Mr. Speaker, I visited the site yesterday and was able to see the recovery operation firsthand, and I would like to pay tribute on behalf of the whole House to the outstanding response and bravery of all the emergency services involved in what were extremely demanding circumstances. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself with the comments made by the Deputy Prime Minister after the very tragic events in Glasgow. Under the Government's proposed new formula for allocating health funding, Sunderland is facing cuts of £42 million. Does the Deputy Prime Minister think it is right to divert NHS funding from areas of higher levels of need to areas of lower levels of need? And how does he think this will impact on the winter crisis?
Mr. Speaker, as she knows, NHS England is now in a position to make some of these big judgments rather than having it. But to have questions on what money goes where in the NHS from a party that, if I understand it correctly, still doesn't agree with our protection of the NHS budget, we're putting £12.7 billion money of extra money into the NHS. I'd be interested to know whether her party agrees.
Dame Angela Watkinson.
Would the Deputy Prime Minister join me in congratulating the London Borough of Havering, which has rehomed 1,000 previously overcrowded families into larger and more suitable accommodation as a result of the government's welfare policy?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly would like to join with my honourable friend to congratulate the Borough of Havering for the excellent work they have done. Overcrowding is a real problem. There are hundreds of thousands of families living in overcrowded properties where children have got no space to do their schoolwork, and the fact that the party opposite has got no answers to some of these fundamental problems they created in the first place shows a bankruptcy of ideas.
Harriet Harman.
Can I join the Deputy Prime Minister in conveying our deepest sympathy to the families of the 9 people who lost their lives in the tragic accident in Glasgow? I join him in paying tribute to the brave work of the emergency services and to the quite remarkable response of the people of Glasgow. Mr. Speaker, can the Deputy Prime Minister tell us, compared to last winter, will this winter's household energy bills be lower or higher?
Mr. Speaker, they would be higher if we had not taken the action that we have. And I would simply point out to her that her party's economically illiterate policy is to impose. In fact, her energy spokesperson said just 2 days ago on television, well, you can't control energy prices. So there we have it. You don't need me to point out that your policy is a con. Your energy spokesman's done it for you.
Harriet Harman.
Mr. Speaker, he has not answered the question. No, he hasn't answered the question I asked. He hasn't answered the question.
As always, we'll get through however long it takes. If members can calm themselves sooner rather than later, so much the better. Harriet Harman.
He's ducked and he's dodged and he hasn't answered the question I've asked. The truth is that household energy bills are not going down, they're going up. And as for the measures, you know, the £50 they've talked about, it's not enough to stop bills rising. But of the £50, can he tell us exactly how much will come from the profits of the energy giants?
I know her piece of paper says I didn't answer the question, but I did actually answer the question. Bills will, on average, be £50 lower than they otherwise would be. That's pretty simple. Pretty simple. And we have done that. We have done that by adjusting the policies while adhering to our green commitments, where government policy has an influence on people's energy bills. Her party's policy is pure fantasy. Total and utter fantasy. We got £50, she has a fantasy freeze.
Harman.
Said he answered the question, but he hasn't. He has not stood at this dispatch box and admitted that as a result of his government's policies, energy bills are going up, not down. He hasn't admitted that. And also, what he hasn't, he can next time he answers, but what he's trying to hide is that not one penny will come from the profits of the energy giants. Who could well afford it? They're tiptoeing round the energy giants, allowing them to put up their bills. When it comes to standing up to the rich and powerful, this government is weak. But when it comes to hitting the most vulnerable in our society, they've got no qualms at all. Last week, at that dispatch box, the Prime Minister said that disabled people are exempt from the bedroom tax. That is not true. Will the Deputy Prime Minister apologise and put the record straight?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady talks about standing up to vested interests. This in the week that we discover that the great courage of the Labour leadership to stand up to their trade union paymasters, guess what? Guess what? Mañana, all too difficult. An absolute...
Order! This House should be the bastion of free speech. Neither the Deputy Prime Minister nor the Right Honourable and Learned Lady must be shouted down, and we will keep going with this session as long as it takes for proper order to be observed. The Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I may say so, it should be the bastion of political parties free of vested interests. And it is high time that the Labour leadership do what they say and stand up to their trade union paymasters. She should stand up to her bosses first.
Harriet Harman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I suggest that he leaves it to us to worry about our party members, especially as so many of them used to be his. Given that for over 90% of people hit by the bedroom tax, there just isn't a smaller property for them to move to, what would he have them do?
Mr. Speaker, under her government, for 13 years, housing benefit to people in the private rented sector was provided only on the basis of the number of rooms needed. We are applying exactly that same rule which they administered for 13 years to those in the social rented sector. And for the reasons we heard earlier, we have at the same time many thousands of families in overcrowded properties and 1.8 million households still on the housing waiting list. Like so many other things, we are sorting out the mess they left behind.
Mr. Speaker, he knows there is no comparison between what we did and what he's doing. Our change was only for new claimants. Their bedroom tax hits people who've lived in their property for years, who can't afford the charges and have got nowhere to go. Mr. Speaker, he stands there and always says that the Lib Dems are making a difference in government. And they certainly are. Yeah. Without the Lib Dems, there'd be no bedroom tax. Without the Lib Dems, there'd be no trebling of tuition fees. And without the Lib Dems, there'd be no top-down reorganisation of the NHS. He says he's a brake on the Tories. But, Mr. Speaker, even I know the difference between the brake and the accelerator. Isn't he the very best deputy a Conservative Prime Minister could ever wish for?
Mr. Speaker, without the Liberal Democrats, there wouldn't be a recovery. Do you know what, Mr. Speaker, we have our differences. Mr. Speaker, we have our
Order! 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 The answer will be heard. The Deputy Prime Minister.
We have our differences on this side of the House. But the one thing that unites us on this side of the House is we wouldn't have gone on a prawn cocktail charm offensive sucking up to the banks which created the problem in the first place. We wouldn't simply say to our children and our grandchildren, you can pay off this generation's debts. No one on this side of the House would have broken the British economy in the first place.
He talks about the recovery, and there might be a recovery for the rich, but for everyone else there's a cost of living crisis. He won't stand up to the powerful, and he won't stand up for the weak. But when it comes to being a loyal deputy to a Tory Prime Minister, he'll go to any lengths, break any promises and sell out any principles. And the truth is that if you want to freeze energy bills and scrap the bedroom tax, it's not going to be the Tories, it's never going to be the Lib Dems, it's got to be Labour.
Mr. Speaker, they're not a government in waiting, they're not even an opposition in waiting. It's 18 months before the next general election. We still have no clue from those 6 questions what the Labour Party would actually do. We do know a few things. An energy con which would see prices go up rather than go down. No apology for crashing the economy in the first place, and a total failure to stand up to the trade union bosses. Mr. Speaker, if they can't manage to come up with some sensible policies, if they can't manage their own party, why should anyone think that they can manage our country?
Mr. Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend is Small Business Saturday, and I will be supporting local firms in my constituency. Companies welcome the reduction that this government has introduced in terms of corporation tax and national insurance contributions, but what more can be done to reduce business rates?
Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to my honourable friend he should wait till the Chancellor makes his autumn statement. Small Business Saturday is a brilliant event to encourage everyone to support small businesses in the UK. Of course, the last government planned to end more generous small business rate relief. We reversed that decision, saving small businesses around £2,000 on average. Yet another example of this side of the House standing up for small businesses let down by that side of the House.
Mr. Graham Morris.
Tenants, councils, housing associations, welfare charities and disabled groups are against it. Lib Dem party policy is against it. Even Danny's dad is against it. So why is the Deputy Prime Minister the last man standing in defending the bedroom tax, a policy as unpopular as Thatcher's poll tax?
Mr. Speaker, of course everybody accepts that when you make a change from one system to another, there are hard cases that need to be dealt with compassionately, and that's why we've trebled the discretionary housing payment to allow local authorities to do it. But could I ask him to have a word with his welfare spokesperson, who has declared recently that the Labour Party is going to be tougher on welfare than the coalition, and yet that side of the House has opposed £83 billion worth of welfare savings. Are they tough or are they nothing?
Mr. Christopher Pincher.
Mr. Speaker,
As you will know more than many, over the last 3 years, the leadership of HS2 have shown a lamentable failure to provide clear and consistent information to residents and businesses affected by Phase 1 of their proposals. Today, in my constituency, they are holding a roadshow to tell my constituents about Phase 2 of their proposals. Will my right honourable friend work with his colleagues in government to ensure that HS2 provide decent information and decent compensation to everyone affected as quickly as possible?
Mr. Speaker, I know he has strong views on this, not least because of the way that HS2 may affect his constituency. And of course I agree with him that not only should full compensation be available, as it will be, but also that there is the right level of information provided. And the Phase 2 route consultation, which started in October, is due to end in January. And as part of that process, there are some 36 information events near the Phase 2 route, including the one he alluded to in his own constituency. And those are opportunities for people to make their views known. But as he knows, I am a staunch supporter of HS2. I think it is a very important part of the wider revamping and modernisation of our national infrastructure, about which the Chief Secretary of the Treasury will be speaking shortly.
Mr. Ian Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are more young people out of work in the Black Country than any of the 8 areas getting his youth unemployment fund. So will he extend that scheme to the Black Country? And if he's going to tell me that the city deal is the answer, will he call an urgent meeting to sort that out and get that scheme underway much more quickly too?
Speaker, I certainly understand his sense of urgency about getting these city deals in the so-called second wave agreed. We're working flat out to do so. As you can imagine, there are a lot of T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted. But the principal idea of making sure that less power is hoarded in Whitehall and more power and resources and freedom to use resources are allocated to local communities, local enterprise partnerships and local authorities is something we're determined to push through in his part of the country as elsewhere.
Sir Alan Beath.
Mr. Speaker, given that Northumberland faces more and more onshore wind farm applications in sensitive sites, can I welcome any reduction in the incentive for onshore wind within our total commitment to maintain our total commitment for renewables, and thank him for his part in this?
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury will confirm this shortly in greater detail, we've adjusted the so-called strike prices as far as they apply to onshore wind and to the solar panel installations, because we believe that it is viable now to do so, but actually made it more attractive for further investment in the offshore wind industry, in which we are already a world leader, which we must maintain our world lead, not least for the benefit of parts of the country such as the North East, all of which, by the way, will be blighted by an economically illiterate energy policy.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Is the Deputy Prime Minister aware that on average, women working full-time have seen their earnings fall by nearly £2,500 since the election? And does he think that the married man's tax allowance is the best way to help women who are paying the price of his government?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady knows the respective views in the coalition on the so-called marriage tax break, but I would point out to her, that it is this government that has ended the injustice under Labour of women being shortchanged in the pension system. It is this government that is raising the point at which people pay income tax, which is disproportionately beneficial to women. 1.5 million women will be £700 or more better off because of our change. And it is this government that is finally providing more affordable childcare places, which weren't provided over the last 13 years under Labour.
David Heath.
Mr. Speaker, the rural equivalent of waiting for Godot is waiting for high-speed broadband. But we had really good news in Somerset this week that 82% of the premises in my constituency will indeed be connected by the end of 2016. The sad fact is that over 8,000 properties will not be. They'll be in the so-called last 10%. So will he now commit the funds that have been set aside to be deployed to finish the job? We don't want complex bidding systems. We don't want match funding, which won't exist. We just want the job done.
Mr. Speaker, we are investing, as he knows, over £33 million already in extending the coverage of superfast broadband in Devon and Somerset as part of the current rural broadband programme, and rollout is finally accelerating, and over 10,000 premises are expected to be covered by the project by the end of the year, and 74,000 by next July. On his point, the so-called final 10%, we announced back in June £250 million of new money to extend superfast broadband coverage further by 2017, and I hear what he says, and the plans will be set out in further detail shortly.
Bill Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Both Nissan and Hitachi are major investors in the northeast of England, and both have said if the UK leaves the EU, it will damage future investment. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that the Conservative Party's hostility to Europe is bad for business and bad for British jobs?
Mr. Speaker, I agree, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of most people on all sides of the House, that it would be a spectacular act of economic suicide for the country to put itself out of the world's largest borderless single market. By some estimates, over 3 million jobs are dependent, one way or another in this country, on our membership of the European Union.
Mr. Aidan Burley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Cannock Chase welcome the government's brave decision to introduce a cap on benefits, but when their average earnings are $23,900 a year before tax, and the cap is set an equivalent $35,000 a year annual salary, they understandably still feel that you can be better off on benefits than in work. Will my right honourable friend look at lowering the overall benefits cap or regionalising it so that it always pays to work wherever you live?
Mr. Speaker, we have not taken an approach of regionalising the benefit cap. I know that is advocated by the party opposite, though very few details have been provided from them so far. So we've taken a national approach, and obviously we then therefore set it at a national average, £26,000, if you like, after tax, equivalent to £35,000 before. The vast majority of people in our country think that is fair, that you shouldn't be able to receive in benefits more than that which you would gain if you were in work earning £35,000 before tax. As on so many issues, I'd be very interested to know whether the party opposite now supports or doesn't support this highly popular measure.
Bana Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has today been pushed into action on business rates by Labour. But just as energy bills will still rise this winter, business rates too will still go up by an average of £250 next year. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that nothing less than Labour's plan to cut and then freeze business rates will do? Why?
Mr. Speaker, the only thing that this coalition government has been pushed into, which is what she said, by the party opposite, is rescuing the economy after the disastrous state that it was in. We had to pull the economy back from the brink because that's where they left it. We've had to do emergency surgery to the banks because they sucked up to the banks. We've had to fill the black hole in the public finances because they created it.
Mr. David Nuttall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you know, I am always anxious to be helpful. So in the spirit of friendly cooperation with our coalition partners, I have given advance notice of my question. Given that the Deputy Prime Minister is only at the dispatch box today because the Prime Minister is in China drumming up more orders for British business, can the Deputy Prime Minister please tell the House what was the common market share of world trade when the UK joined in 1973, and what is the EU share of world trade today?
Mr. Speaker, the EU share of world trade today, I think, is around 20%. I would merely say to him in an equally friendly spirit, in which I know the question was intended, was that the Prime Minister has actually been advocating a new EU-China trade deal, precisely because the European Union remains, notwithstanding all the other changes in the world, a very, very powerful trading bloc on the world scene.
Speaker, last week Goldman Sachs placed the value of Royal Mail shares at 610 pence each. But just 2 months ago, they advised the government that investors would walk away if they sold at over 330 pence. Does the Deputy Prime Minister believe that he has secured value for money for the taxpayers?
Mr. Speaker, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Business, has explained, this is yet another example of us doing something which they ducked while they were in government. And the price at which we set the sale was independently recommended to us, and it was actually at the highest point of the range, which was provided to us by independent advisors.
Mr. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, Harrow Council officers closed down an unlicensed HMO, house in multiple occupation, with 11 unrelated adults living in a 3-bedroom property, each paying £160 a week in rent to a rogue landlord. Harrow Council is now investigating a further 100 cases. Would my right honourable friend not agree that it is time that we criminalised rogue landlords to protect the vulnerable?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm appalled to hear about that example, yet again, of rogue landlords behaving unacceptably. Local authorities, as he knows, including in Harrow, have strong powers to tackle rogue landlords, and we expect them to make full use of those powers. We announced a package last October to help hard-working tenants get a better deal when renting a home, including a commitment to look at property conditions in the private rented sector, and we will shortly be announcing which local authorities will receive a share in £3 million worth of funding to help them tackle rogue and criminal landlords.
Mr. Nick Rainsford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When he signed the coalition agreement with its commitment to giving more power to parents and pupils to choose a good school, did he ever envisage it would lead to a situation where Conservative-controlled Hammersmith and Fulham Council is currently threatening to close the successful and popular Sullivan Primary School, rated good by Ofsted, against the overwhelming opposition of the parents, the governors, the pupils and local residents in order to hand the site over for a free school?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, is here, and I'm sure he will want to write to you on that specific case. But actually, one of the things that this government has done is remove the dead hand of bureaucracy and centralisation in our school system to make sure that parents are freer to teach in the way that they judge best in the classroom, and that parents have a greater role where they want to in the running of our schools.
Mr. Charles Kennedy.
Mr. Speaker, with reference back to the recent question from the honourable gentleman, perhaps not my honourable friend on this issue for Bury North, would the Deputy Prime Minister agree that where the coalition is concerned on Europe, actions actually speak louder than words? And would he agree that the Chancellor's decision some time back to assist the Irish economy, the Foreign Secretary's very responsible conduct of the internal European governmental review, and indeed the Prime Minister's own words just this week in China, that get his referendum, he wants to recommend we stay in. This is a great boost of confidence for people like him and me, down the line Liberal Democrat pro-Europeans.
Mr. Speaker, it is always a joy to hear the mischievous wit and wisdom of my right honourable friend, and as he knows, we are as one on the European issue. We need to, of course, reform the European Union. We need to strip away bureaucracy where that can be done. We need to make it more transparent. We need to make it more efficient. But we also need to continue to exercise British leadership in the European Union club, of which we've been a member for so many years.
Mr. Andrew Gwynn.
Figures from the National Health Service show that an additional 600,000 people used accident and emergency departments last winter, an increase of 11% since 2010. And it looks set to get much worse this winter. Why?
I don't think it's very helpful to the millions of people working in the NHS to talk down their admirable efforts in making sure that he really should stop talking down the NHS. He should also agree with us that the NHS needs more rather than less money. And he might be interested to know that the last time the right honourable member sitting over there was Secretary of State for Health, the average waiting time in accident and emergency awards to be attended to was 77 minutes. We've cut that in half to 33 minutes.
Paul Uppal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the NCA arrested 6 individuals around the allegations of match fixing in the English Football League. Can my right honourable friend assure me and the House that every possible measure is taken by the 3 bodies of the FA, the Gambling Commission and the NCA to uphold the integrity of English football?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure he speaks on behalf of everybody in the House and certainly all football fans when I say that, or when he says that it's important that we get to the bottom of this. It's, by the way, a rather good example of the excellent early work of the NCA. This is exactly why the NCA was established, to be able to look at these complex cases, work across jurisdictions, work with different agencies, and make sure that any suspicion or hint of corruption in that great game is removed.
Mr Elfyn Clwyd. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister will be aware of the case that I'm raising with him now. It's an urgent matter that I'd like him to address. A young constituent of mine fled a violent and abusive relationship in Italy and brought with her her 3.5-year-old son. She's now in Wales. Since then, the High Court have ruled under the Hague Convention that she is to return to Italy on Monday. Given that, may I ask the Prime Minister Deputy Prime Minister to use his best endeavours to ensure that the Italian authorities realise that arresting her would be unfair and disproportionate, and secondly, it would be little short of abominable to take that young boy into care to a care centre pending the outcome of proceedings.
Mr Speaker, I am aware of obviously his interest in this case. It's a desperately sad case, and on a human level, I'd love to be able to sort of pronounce on it, but as he knows, ministers cannot comment on or intervene in cases that are or have been before the courts, whether in this country or abroad. We really can't. However, I'm sure that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office will be able to provide consular assistance to the mother as she pursues her case back in Italy, including providing details of English-speaking local lawyers and seeking updates from the local court about progress in the case.
Mr John Barron.
Speaker, it may surprise the Deputy Prime Minister to learn that the Liberals have a reputation of advocating an EU in-out referendum at elections, but actually not following that through here when in this place. Will he now put that right by encouraging his Liberal colleagues in the House of Lords to support our EU referendum bill?
Mr Speaker, he and I joined forces in the lobby back in July 2011 to legislate for the first time for a referendum lock which for the first time guarantees in law that if the rules of the European Union change, if there's a transfer of sovereignty from this place to the European Union, there will be a referendum. That is the position my party believes in. That is our guarantee in law to the British people that a referendum will take place when circumstances determine. I understand his party is having a debate which is now changing that position. My party, however, will stick to what we legislated for in the summer of 2011.
Isla Stewart.
My honourable friend for Glasgow North wanted to know whether the British taxpayer got value for money on the sale of Royal Mail. Yes or no?
Mr Speaker, our judgment is yes, that easy though it might be to make snapshot judgments about the value of the company according to the price on the markets in any one day, we, on this issue, as on so many other issues, are determined to take a long-term view, not score short-term political points.
Mr Peter Bone.
Mr Speaker, hasn't the acting Prime Minister been outstanding today? I think if you were listening on the radio, you would have thought it was the Right Honourable Member for Witney at the dispatch box. Now, I think he is turning into a Tory. Can I test that theory? New Clause 1 of the immigration bill has been signed by 60 coalition MPs calling for the transitional arrangements for Bulgaria and Romania to be continued. Does he agree with that?
Mr Speaker, I'm glad he hasn't raised his morbid obsession with the early demise or death of the Prime Minister, which I know is the subject of his private member's bill. And thank him. I also want to thank him for his very mixed, double-edged compliment just there. On the issue, as he knows, the Prime Minister, myself, the whole government made a series of announcements last week where we are tightening up the access to benefits of those migrants who come from other parts of the European Union to this country. I believe we should protect and defend the principle of the freedom of movement, but the freedom to move to seek work is not the same as the freedom to claim. That is the distinction which this government is now making.
Order.